Hi, everybody. Out there in Facebook world, I am Paul Sterling. I'm the author of Argue Less, Love More, uh, a couples coach. And tonight, I am extremely honored and touched because I get to interview a dear friend and someone who has immense wisdom. And each time I am around him, I learn more about myself. And I learned more about compassionate communication and a lot of ways how to slow down and actually feel my feelings, because as a man, I tend to rush by them. So John Kiyon is a dad, a mediator, a mentor, a teacher of something called nonviolent communication. And tonight we're going to dive in to men, masculinity, and mindfulness, and what all of those mean. So, John, welcome. And what do you want to say about yourself here?
Oh, well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate being with you here right now. And, well, you kind of said it in terms of my background in the context of our conversation. Yeah, being a father, being a husband, doing work in the world that I like to generally call just empathic communication. How do we communicate in ways that bring us, I think of empathic connection as something that's always there, but we lose touch with it, and the compassion that naturally flows from that. And so doing that kind of work in the world, and been doing it for over 20 years now, and just looking forward to talking about this topic with you and seeing where we go. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, I'll kind of lead it a little bit in that right now we're on Facebook, and on Facebook there is such challenges between the polarization of people. This with the world of Black Lives Matter, and then making Black Lives Matter wrong. And it's like, how do we dance in this? To me, what made America great is that we had a capacity to handle diversity, that we had immigrants from all around the world, that we had people from all different diversity. And it seems like what's happening is we have less and less capacity to be with someone who has an opinion that's different than our own. And I'm wondering, in the mind, what mindfulness is, and how do we apply mindfulness in that category if it's possible?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what comes up in my mind as you start to talk about that. That what happened for me when I saw the George Floyd video, and in the wake of the other the people, Black people that got killed recently by police, and so I think what for me the shock of it, and what was so eye-opening, because I've obviously living here in this country. I think it's the ideals that you spoke about, yeah, and really having a lot of doubts about our country in various ways, but still like holding on to certain ideals, and then that series of events, in the context of seeing how our country's responded to coronavirus and what's happening politically in our country, and which we can maybe get into a lot of related issues to this, but what sort of really broke things open for me, and I'm guessing for so many people, is the way that it's still there, the racism, the systemic oppression, that to be mindful of that, to be aware in a whole way that I was just wanting to believe it was like, oh, that's pretty much in the past now, like that, and to be able to really be present to the heartbreak of realizing how much it hasn't I think there have been changes. I hope, but still, how much things haven't changed, and how Black folks and others and people of color treated in this country. And so to be mindful of first just our reactions to can we sit with the pain? If that does pain us, can we be with that pain and not sort of push it away because it's too uncomfortable and sort of too disturbing? And it's so amazing to have seen people out in the streets, and a lot more white people like us out in the streets, and even amidst the coronavirus, and being willing to risk things, and I went out there some too and risked getting arrested, getting pepper sprayed, and what it didn't happen, I'm grateful for, but just the willingness to say, but anyways, to allow that pain to be present to it, and the greater awareness of what actually is happening in this country culturally, what we as a country have done in other countries that have been oppressive, and just like seeing more and more and more of like the way our economy is set up, the way everything is set up, that is so unhealthy. And I think I've told you this, but I see my work as really about health and wellness, and how empathic communication is part of being healthy. And it's so painful to see how much unhealth, like toxicity in the way we live and the way we relate to each other as different groups, and the way, and white people really have still held on to so much privilege and been part of so much oppression. It's just it's horrible to see, but then also liberating to go, okay, let's really face it. To me, mindfulness is like really facing and being present to it. So much could say, but that's what came up with when you started speaking.
Thank you. Yeah, there were several things that you touched on there. There's an expression that says we don't know who discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't fish. And what that means is when we're immersed in something, we don't even see it. Like, my parents were at Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. I was marching on Washington when I was 15. It was like, and I still didn't see the next level up. I didn't, realize the pain and the power. And it's like I'm trying to figure out what's a good solution, because attacking other people rarely works. I think something Marshall said, or one of my mentors along the way said, hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I taught in prison for 8.5 years, and it's rare that if prisoners aren't treated well, that they come out being a better citizen.
Right.
They come out more hurt. And so it's like, how can we end that cycle? And so I thought of it as, when I did my work in prison, I thought of it as a feminist issue, because the women tended to get the brunt of masculine violence.
Mm.
And so by giving masculine inmates better tools to communicate, they're less likely to move towards violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of our mutual teachers, Marshall Rosenberg, said that violence is a desperate attempt to get a need met. I'm not quoting it exactly right, but I'm going to hand that to you and see what you have to say about it.
Is it about like the tragic expression of our unmet needs? Is that
yes, that's much closer to what Marshall said, that violence is a tragic expression of an unmet need, and we're in a culture of need shame. By the way, just so everybody out there in Facebook land, my camera is up here and my screen is down there, so I'm like, I am, if I want to look in John's eyes, I look down here, and then if I want to see you, it's like there. So I'd love to hear about mindfulness and needs and need shame, wherever you want to go with that.
Yeah, and violence. So maybe starting with violence
Hmm.
and how, yeah, that was the insight of Marshall, that that everything we do, that we think, that we feel, we can connect back to underlying human needs, and that we're normally not conscious, we're not mindful of those needs unless we've trained ourselves. I'd say most cultures around the world and over time we've not learned how to be conscious. What are those needs that for us humans are even beyond human life, just all of life, meeting needs for food and sustenance and connection and safety and some form of care, um, and protection and community and belonging. And I think all kinds of animals could relate to those needs. And so without being conscious of the needs we're meeting, we can develop in NVC land, nonviolent communication land, we call it strategies. So we can have strategies to meet our needs that can be tragic and not be very effective at all and be very costly. So violence often can be used thinking that, or without it, just automatically, what we people grew up with and got kind of habits and conditioning to use violence, whether it's verbal violence or physical violence, some sort of domination kind of strategies, maybe control, power over, just if that's what we learn, especially as men, you can learn those strategies to use the physical force, the size, the aggression to meet needs, though, but usually not aware that we're actually trying to meet, maybe we're trying to meet the need for love and respect and being cared about and being valued, but then using forms of violence and coercion or intimidation or whatever to try to get those needs met, even safety. But if we try to get safe by doing that, often we don't even end up feeling safe. Nobody feels safe. So just the consciousness of what needs are motivating us, and whatever thought and judgment is going through our mind, whatever feeling is bubbling up, whatever action is starting to come online, habitual action, what human need, what life need is that in service of, and if we can be conscious. That was Marshall Rosenberg's amazing insight, that if we can become conscious of those needs, then we can choose more consciously how we want to meet them in more and more, what he would say is, more effective and less costly ways.
I would love to dive in a little deeper there, because, and I was the one who brought up the concept of need shame. You didn't, but in so much of my couples work, people rarely even know what needs are, and are embarrassed that they have them or ashamed that they have them. And there's a whole thing of like needy and narcissistic and all that. And so how do you do this dance of expressing your needs in a culture that tells you you shouldn't have needs?
Yeah. Well, I think a number of different ways I could go with that question. But needs, depending on how we define the word. Yeah. So need and can mean a kind of neediness, like I need things, I need you, Paul, I need you to be a certain way for me to be okay, right? I mean, that's what we're afraid of, that kind of dependency and kind of feeling weak and powerless because I need things in order to be okay. But the way I'm talking about needs, and so I guess now I'm realizing how glad I am you brought that up, because it is very common to have that other understanding. So the understanding I'd want people to have of that word is, it's these universal qualities that we all share, like love and security and respect and consideration and freedom and things. So the idea that we can be conscious of these needs, but without feeling like we have to get them met by anybody or anything in particular. We can be very sort of powerful and strong in the ways we can sit with unmet needs. We can be creative in lots of different ways to meet needs. So it really is a very different construct than the way that word is often used, of in a sense that can convey a sort of weakness or neediness. But even just to say a need can, as you're pointing out too, just to say that there's, I'm really feeling this need for care right now, or tenderness, or respect, or to feel loved and valued, to matter, right? To say that can feel so vulnerable, and especially as a male, right? I think men and women, stereotypically can have different relationships with feelings and needs and what feels okay and not okay. But like, I'll just speak for male, like white men, my experience being a man is that to show that vulnerability can be really scary. And yet that's the thing that connects us, right? That's if we're willing to be vulnerable and share what we're actually feeling and what our needs really are. Like that's what we really want, the kind of connection that comes from that vulnerability. And yet it's terrifying. It can be terrifying to reveal. And culturally, yeah, exactly as you're saying, we're not supported to reveal that culturally, especially as men. I think, there are other ways that maybe, men or whatever, but we can go there too if you want. But just in general, yeah, to be able to go there even when it's really scary. I think that's one of the practices, the mindful practices with language, mindfulness of language, and how can are we willing to face that fear of feeling really vulnerable and exposed and open about what really matters to us. And
And what will somebody do with it? Because I look at it, and the truth of the matter is, I trust women more than I trust men. Because in growing up, and I just interviewed one of my mentors, Allison Armstrong, a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things she talks about is voluntarily vulnerable. And it's such an act of courage. And growing up with my dad, who was Irish alcoholic, and he had, I don't want to paint him into like one-sided. He had a huge heart too. And he could be his favorite expression, or one of them, was the best defense is a strong offense. So vulnerability was not met as a courageous act in my family. It was met as a weakness.
Yeah.
And I watched what men did with power. My older brother, what he did with power, what my dad did with power. And I went, wow, if that's masculinity, I don't like it. And then I watched my mom with her feelings, and that didn't look safe. So I was like trapped in between these two things. And I left home at age 17 to go become a commercial fisherman in Alaska. It's like as far away as I could get. And I guess I wanted to prove I was tough. And now I'm trying a whole different world of like, how can I be courageous? My weak spot, I'll just say it, is there are three ways to communicate: from our heads, our hearts, or our hurts. This is our little reptile brain. And I'm consciously trying to spend more time in my heart, because my head is my safe space. If I can figure shit out, then it will be okay.
Yeah.
And so what is mindfulness, and how do we spend more time in our hearts? And the reason I'm asking you, John, is because every time I get around you, it's like I say this lovingly, it's contagious. I start moving into my heart. I start slowing down. It's like, and I start feeling feelings I normally like to avoid.
Yeah, well, I can get in my head pretty easily too, I notice. And and I appreciate you saying that, Paul. Thank you. That touches me. But the practice, for me, I try to remember to do every day, and I offer in supporting others is that we often sort of live up here, like we're looking out our eyes, and we're kind of that sense we're riding around up in our heads. And can we keep remembering to drop actually down into our bodies? So maybe anybody listening right now, just to see what that's like to not be perceiving from kind of the head space, but actually drop your attention down into the body, like you're feeling from your body, from within your body, heart and belly and your whole body. So it really feels different to drop attention down there. And then in terms of communication, can I talk from there? Can I speak about my feelings in my body from being present in a kind of gentle way in my body? And then sort of putting words to, I was telling you before we started the interview, there's some nervousness in me about just talking about these things and being live, not know who's listening. And so just to be in my body, being able to kind of sit with that and feel those sensations, feel the emotional waves of emotion, and to actually have attention down there. And then how do we consciously put language that's not about our thoughts? So for a little, NVC tip here, that we can easily, when we're trying to talk about our feelings, if we want to talk about it, be vulnerable. It is more vulnerable to do what I'm about to say, to talk about if I'm feeling anxious or scared or sad and whatever, those kind of emotions, versus I feel that, like, oh, I feel like this is not that great of a whatever. I feel that this is not very appropriate, or that's just, we use the word feel, but we follow it with still of a thought, or I feel manipulated, I feel attacked, right? Versus I feel hurt. I feel hurt. I feel vulnerable. I feel nervous. I feel, trepidation about what we're going to talk about and where we're going to go with this. So to me, that's that combination, to bring the actual felt experiencing, say, of the body, and then putting language to that, which takes a lot of practice. And but I think that's what makes communication rich and connecting, and really feed our souls if we can actually go there.
And if we look at it culturally, the masculine has not been rewarded for having feelings. In the workplace, we tend to get rewarded for one of two things: either our thoughts, like we can solve a problem, figure something out, we're in our heads, or commercial fishing, I was really rewarded for my ability to ignore what I was feeling in my body, because we would work on a regular basis, 24-hour days, like work to the point where you fall asleep standing up. Like,
yeah.
And there was a part of me that still has some intense pride of, like, I was able to do that. And at the same point, it didn't make me a great person to be in a relationship with, because I expected it from others. And I shut off feelings. And so it's like, how do we change what it means to be a man, and how to be, what is mindful without spending more time in your head? Because mindful. And by the way, as you're thinking of that, thank you, Jay, for your comments, and everybody else. Some of the comments are longer than I can read right now without taking my attention away from the conversation. So I will go through all of them, if not during the call, after the call, and respond wherever I can. And we appreciate your interacting with us here. So what is the transformation in mindfulness, and what does it really mean if it's not spending more time in your head?
Well, I'm still with something you said about expecting it from others, and what, if part of what we're trying to talk about is sort of the masculine psyche, and how do we relate to these things like feelings and needs and vulnerability and violence and power over and control and aggression and domination, really, and seeing that systemically as well as, interpersonally. So when I was thinking maybe I'd riff off what you said, but I realized that part I didn't quite follow when you said you became the salmon fisherman and the macho manly man that was the fisher guy that's gonna not be in his body or his feelings because he's going to just ride roughshod over all that. And you said expecting it from others. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I was married at the time. That was not part of the marriage skills lesson that I was going through. They say you teach what you need to learn, and I definitely needed to learn some relationship skills. And so it's like, and I think I can go back to my dad, how hard it was for him, for us to be vulnerable around him.
Mm-hmm.
That it triggered something inside of him. And so when I was ignoring my needs and my feelings, I expected my crew to do that. What are you, a sissy? I expected at times my ex-wife to do that, because, that's what you do when you're tough. You ignore those feelings. You don't talk about them. You work until the work is done. If there's a, work to get done, we don't care if you're tired. I would work seasick. For 18 years, I would get seasick. Like, this is I don't know if you've ever been seasick. It is hell.
Yeah.
Nobody cared whether I got sick or not, as long as I continued to work. I would work as, I would be the captain, and it's like roll down the window, get sick, go back to work. It's ignore what's going on here.
Yes.
Get the job done.
And that's then, because that's how you treated your body and yourself, that's what you then expected others to do, to treat themselves that way, to treat each other that way. That's what you meant. Yeah.
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 Don't be a sissy.
Yeah. 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 So all these messages boys and then men grow up with about, I played a lot of sports growing up. So I spent a lot of time around, making those kind of jokes and comments about, like you just said, sort of putting down any kind of soft feelings, anything that wasn't tough, talking about girls in certain ways, they're objectifying and all of that. So a lot of all the cultural conditioning, right, to sort of deny that softer side of the actual feelings and what needs really, are connecting, are bring us joy to contribute to one another, right? So you're pointing to that, and I think we're talking about too the courage it can take to not even when you start to become, aware, mindful of some of these patterns, these cultural conditioning, programming, to not just. So here's, I'm thinking of like what it could be also racial comments or something where, you might be more and more aware, like this kind of, that's not okay, or talking about feelings in this disparaging way isn't feeling okay, or women is not feeling okay. But am I going to say something? Or do I want to just be like fit in with the guys, and, not rock? You just kind of, I don't know how much we men talk about the kind of the peer pressure almost, to the pull to just kind of want to laugh it off. And maybe we won't go along. We won't chime in, but we'll just kind of be quiet if that kind of, right. And then I feel like the time now, whether it's about racial things or other things that, the Me Too movement, that are we willing, to speak up, to say something when it's uncomfortable, to go, hey, you know what, that doesn't feel okay. I'm not okay with that. So can more and more, especially white men, straight, like just be willing to take that risk to talk about our feelings, like that. I feel like upset hearing that, and that's my values. That's not okay with me. So the courage to do that is what I hear you really talking about.
Yeah, and to get it to lean into a dialogue rather than, I call it BSW, rather than making somebody bad, stupid, and wrong, because it doesn't change them. It just has them not talk about it in front of you. So how can you actually get in a dialogue that opens up a different experience? And I have my own shame of not doing this. I can think of a very specific event. I was in Hawaii. I was living there, and I was going to be teaching a relationship workshop. So like here I am. I'm about to teach all these people about relationships. I am sitting in a beautiful restaurant on Kauai, and I'm by myself making notes for the course. And a guy is sitting at the bar, and he is being so derogatory about his ex and sort of about women in general. And it's like, I realize I'm kind of like, should I? And I didn't. And I didn't. And it's like afterwards I went, wow, look at what I didn't do. And the interesting thing, if he had been talking about a Black person like that, I definitely would have. And it's like, I went, wow, where did I draw the line? That sucked. Why didn't I stand up for our sisters then? Because, it's like, what is okay and what isn't okay? And I think for me, mindfulness, this is just my definition, but there's a difference between routine and ritual, conscious and unconscious. Like sometimes I can drive somewhere that I've driven a lot of times, and it's almost like I wake up and I'm there. I come out of my trance and it's like, I've arrived.
Right.
And I went over, I'll just give you another example of that, and then I want to switch over to you, but it's like I went over a 24-foot dam in a kayak. And I was so scared that I wasn't present on the way down. So it's like I kind of remember the top, I remember the bottom, but the rest was a blur. So like for me to be mindful, I had to go back and do it again. Like, how can I be present in a terrifying time? And right now in my world, this is my definition, but democracy is an experiment. And if we don't stay present right now, we may lose that experiment.
Lose it. Yeah. I think that's really true. I think it's really possible that we could lose it. Yeah. And so the courage to speak up in all kinds of ways. Yes, the stakes are getting pretty high. And I heard you talk about shame, and I can really relate to that. How often I feel shame in similar way, or just the not being enough. And men don't often talk about that shame. Like, I don't even use that vocabulary a lot with myself, but it is there a lot. It can be like the water we swim in, the air we breathe. So, but anyways, I want to go, I don't want to get far from what you brought up about being in the bar. And, what comes to me is in terms of mindfulness, can I first notice how uncomfortable I am in those moments, about to go over the waterfall, the drop, the 24-foot drop in the kayak. And can I notice, like, oh my body's freaking out right now. I have the image. I could say something. I'm not liking what I'm hearing, but oh my God, my whole body's going nuts with anxiety and stress. And is this going to lead to conflict, and that natural fear of that? And so first, can we just like be present to that, as you're saying? And then you also said something so important, Paul, about I could go into that conversation, and there's a reason why I'd be scared of this too. I could go in a kind of aggressive way, like, hey, that's not okay, and you're bad, whatever you said, those three things,
Bad, stupid, wrong.
You're wrong, to think that, to say that. How could you be such an asshole or a racist or a bigoted or sexist or what, right? You could come out all that energy. And also not being like all the ways that I carry that inside of me, right? The hypocrisy of, getting all high and mighty with someone else when I, far from perfect. And so how to have this, the work I do is like, how do you have these difficult conversations that have empathy, right? That actually can like kind of connect to what's going on in someone behind thinking and believing and saying certain stuff or doing certain, can we connect to the human underneath all that? That's just like us, like the inside Marshall Rosenberg, again, we talked about him, that we all are meeting the same needs, the same set of needs. We're all connected in that universal way. So here's another human being trying his or her, let's say his best to meet some needs, but he's doing this way that I find tragic, tragic strategies of thinking and speaking and acting that But how to have the conversation in a way that has some empathy in it, but where my wife would point out, sometimes I can be so empathic that I'm not being honest enough. Am I going to be authentic and also reveal that, because we could just have the conversation where I kind of try to, oh, so when you talk that way, is this what's going on for you behind that guy? But could I also reveal, like, and I'd like you to hear when you're talking that way, I feel really uncomfortable with that. That's really not at all the way I want to see women treated or talked about, or people of color, or whatever the issue is. That can I be vulnerable again? So in a way that isn't trying to be violent with this person, but just be real and be vulnerable and just say, this is not okay with me that we talk this way. And so anyways, to do all that, to be aware of the massive discomfort first, to then enter in with the intention to connect and have empathy, but also be really, really honest in a vulnerable way. To do all of that is not easy. But as you're saying, I think the stakes now in our society on all kinds of levels to not cooperate. I think of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and like, how do we not cooperate with all this, if I may, all bullshit that we live in, all these screwed up ways of thinking and acting and treating each other and judging each other. And like, in so many levels, Marshall Rosenberg talked about domination systems and culture we live in without even knowing it. We're, as you said, we're the fish swimming in this water, and it plays out in these interpersonal ways. It plays out in these systemic ways. But how can we just have the courage, enough of us, a critical mass, that say, no, I'm not going to participate in this shit anymore. Like, no.
And you look at the power of that. And I had this picture, as you're saying, it is sort of the whack-a-mole game. I don't know if you know what that is. Where the head pops up and boom. So, okay, now we're going to pick on blacks and then Mexicans and then it's like, and women that are speaking up, and it's scary. Like, oh, well, it's them. They're picking on them now. I better not stick my head up, or I'm going to be next.
Can be whacked, yeah.
Which
can happen. That
totally happen.
Totally happen.
And at the same point, if enough of us stick our heads up at once, it makes a huge difference. And you look at what one person can do. My hero, Greta, the environmentalist, from where was Sweden, and just one girl speaking the truth, like so vulnerable in all of her interesting ways of life, and just to stand in that truth. And Martin Luther King standing in his truth, and Gandhi, and it's just like, what can we do when we are unwilling to buy the lie? That things are okay as long as I'm in my gated community.
Right. Privilege. We got our privileges here. We're going to be okay and safe. But
but don't screw with.
You reminded me to say something I really wanted to say. That one of the things that hit me so hard when the George Floyd video came out, and then all the dominoes started falling, was that, whatever privilege, whatever kind of benefits I have gotten, which have been enormous, just being white, being male, growing up in a pretty privileged background, it felt like there is so much. I just got in touch with this disgust, this absolute revulsion, and I think there's enough people that have privilege that are saying, we don't want this. They don't want to live this way. There's no, who wants, it's one thing to say, oh, I feel really bad for these people out there that, and how they're treated, versus like, no, this is like impacting me. I don't want to live in a system like this. This is making me feel sick to my stomach. And I want to do everything I can to treat, as I think Cornel West, all my brothers and sisters, like we're all brothers and sisters in this, and let's stand up for each other, whatever our skin color, whatever our backgrounds, whatever our gender, like, and because, not as some just an altruistic act, but also as like, I don't want to feel disgusted in living in this way that our culture has just kind of amassed over all this time, the snowball of all this crap. And yeah.
Well, I think that one of the people who's a hero of mine is Bernie Sanders, and Bernie was trying to bring accountability to politicians, and I think that's partly why he had such a tough go of it. And underneath it, in my mind, what I just heard when you started saying what you were saying is that there is a belief system. I talk about, I don't know if you've heard me talk about ROS, your relationship operating system.
Yeah.
So that's like the programming in our mind, but we also have our life operating system. And what I started to think about with what you said is that there's two hugely different belief systems, and one is that there isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to have mine, you can't have yours. And if you have yours, I won't be okay. So for me to have my multi-million dollar, homes here and there and, all around, if for me to have that kind of exorbitant wealth, which I just saying I don't have, but I was, for example case, somebody else has to live at the poverty line. Yeah. Somebody else has to, be working hard. And like they have this story out there that hard work will make you wealthy. And you know what? Okay, so you got to say your thing. The bullshit is that I live in California. I live in Carmel Valley, so I drive by Salinas. There's farm workers that are up early, up late. It would break my back. I'm used to hard work, commercial fishing. They work extremely hard, but I don't see them on the way to being super wealthy. There's this inordinate thing, hard work equals wealth. Not really. No, it depends on the work.
No, the system is rigged against so many people. More and more, the inequality. Yeah.
So it's like, how do we? Because right now, one of the things that's happened is couples have been locked at home together and spent much more time together than they may have ever spent. Like my partner and I were talking about it and said, you know how dog years, 1 year is 7 dog years? Well, we have the social distancing year. 1 month of time together is probably 2 years of how much time people would normally spend together. And there's been a lot of stress. And there's been actually a lot more domestic violence. And I wanted to just bring that up to tap back into mindfulness. How can men specifically deal with their anger in a way that doesn't lash out on the people that they love and care about?
Well, you talked about scarcity, and I'd like to tie that into what you kind of segue to. I think there is a connection there. I don't know. I guess it's male feeling really, really. I don't know the word. Bought into the idea that I'm the provider, and I've got all this pressure and stress on me, and expectation, and that there's this sense of scarcity. There's not enough. And you talked about all. Even if you have $1 billion, you can think you don't have enough. It's just ridiculous. And like we live in this culture in this way that our whole that's based in this idea of not enough, and that we got to consume more and all that. And I think that's related in some way to if you're in a relationship and it can happen, whether female or male, but where one uses violence to overpower another, and domestic violence and relationship violence, that that there's a sense of scarcity, and out of that fear that I need to control, I need to oppress, I need to, but instead, what's the alternative, Paul, right? You and I think are trying to speak to that there is an alternative that's much more effective. It's, if you look at the needs, if you're in that position, say you're a man and you're in that position and you're angry, but underneath that, you're probably really scared. And and you've got needs that you may be scared to acknowledge, but maybe you want to be loved and you want to feel like you're enough, you're good enough, and you matter, and you're loved and you're cared about, and you can feel safe, right, and secure. And so the strategy might be to go to violence, but actually that's probably not working for you too well, and to really stop and go, what's going on in me? The mindfulness is to catch our thoughts, our feelings, and go inside and notice underneath, maybe I'm terrified and I want to feel safe, I want to feel loved, I want to feel like I'm respected and I'm appreciated and I matter. What can I do that's likely to create that? One could just be vulnerable about it. Can I just share that? Can I just be real with my partner, the person I'm with, that I'm really angry, and underneath that I'm really hurt and I'm scared because I want to know that I matter and I'm good enough and I can take care, I can provide, and I can, all these things. Can I just be vulnerable in that instead of act it out through violence? Which, right? I mean, if that's how you grew up, that's the modeling you got, sure. Like that, let's not make you wrong for that, because that doesn't help. Then you just go into a shame spiral. And I know that spiral well, the shame. But that you and I talking about this, hopefully anybody could hear that gets into that place. Like, try vulnerability, try being, revealing some of that vulnerability of what's actually going on in you, even though you find other ways.
I wish I had the visual here, but a pyramid, 3 points. On one side is, and these are places we can communicate from, and I've been in all 3 places. One place on the lower, this is my left hand, is collapsed. I'm reactive, I collapse, like I become the martyr when challenged. So this is when we get triggered and upset, where do we go? So I can collapse, or I can go combative. And how this ties in is, combative is, I'm going to get my needs met in spite of yours. My needs matter more than yours. If I collapse, my needs don't matter as much as yours. And then there's this top place, which I call courageous and compassionate, which is like, how do I do this dance to figure out what your needs are and what my needs are? And what I got from Marshall Rosenberg about nonviolent communication, because so many people said, no, I'm not violent. He didn't mean physically violent there, although that was part of it. But it's like, violence is when I'm going to get my needs met in spite of yours, and your needs don't matter to me. Or I give up on my needs and I'm violent to myself so that I get your approval. So collapse, combative, courageous is a model to kind of look at, and I on a regular basis, I look at it and I go, because to me, growing up, the safe place was to collapse. I couldn't be combative against my dad or my older brother because it got my ass kicked. And not a little bit, but my older brother had a certain, like, he needed, for him to feel safe, he needed to make me feel really scared. So thank you for listening to that. And I'm wondering if anything comes up for you on that. And hi, Beth out there. And if people let us know where they're listening in from, that would be sweet, because I love the story I tell myself that we reach all around the world. So.
And remind me, Paul, how much time do we have left? When do we end?
We have 10 minutes left.
10 minutes left. Okay. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing the vulnerability and with your family and the relationships and the work that you did. Yeah, I'm trying to think where to go with what you've shared about that. No, I'm glad we're talking about this, about especially kind of men and male. The male psyche can go into these kind of power over modes, and I think it does come out of a lot of sense of scarcity, like it's either me or the other, and it's if
Mhm.
it's going to be one or the other, maybe it's going to be me, the survival of the fittest, and or whatever. But that is, like you said, the top of the pyramid. Is there's a way that's not either of those two other poles, and there's a way to be really caring for both of us equally, ourselves and others, and find ways that can work for both of us. So that sounds a little too cliched for me at the moment, but I like that you pointed to that pattern. Yeah, I'm thinking of another topic we maybe could touch while we're on here, but I don't know if there's anything
Yeah.
more about this one.
Well, my curiosity would be, and the terms are collapsed, combative, or courageous and compassionate at the top there.
Yeah,
But it's like, how do you're a parent. How do you teach the young men in your family that are growing up a way of being so that, because we teach prejudice. It's rare that somebody just gets it from the world. It
yeah,
sort of gets passed down from generation to generation. So how do we break that cycle?
yeah, yeah. That was the other area I wanted to cover before we ended. Uh, Being a father and what that has meant to me, and especially with my son. And what am I teaching my son? What am I modeling for my son? What am I actually teaching? And there's been this fear in me that I because I want to give him so much space to be his own person and all that, have I shown up enough for him? Have I, I'd say that's my own journey as a parent, and sort of my self-doubts that come up as a parent. And am I plugged in enough? And am I present enough? Am I engaged? Am I really, um, yeah, I could say so much. But to get to your question about that triangle, and how we can have another option besides collapsing, or I forget what you said, the other one, overpowering,
Combative, yeah.
out of that I did a lot of mediating between my kids when I was when they were younger. Right now they're in their teenage years, and they have a really good relationship. They really don't fight any at all. Hard. I mean, it's very rare. And I like to think it's because I showed them how they can communicate in this way that is the top of that pyramid. They could try to hear what's important to each other. They can speak honestly about what's important to them. They could try to say back to each other what they're hearing. And they needed help to do that. They needed lots of help, but they kind of learned it's possible that if you are willing to slow down, which a lot of times it's hard to slow down. We go
Mhm.
so fast now in our culture, but to slow down and to really try to listen and understand, and in that, so showing them that there's a way to honor kind of ourselves. We don't have to give ourselves up, but we can also really listen and try to take in what's important to other people. We don't have to choose between. We can do both. We can just do both. You don't have to choose. And then out of that, so what we often don't do in our culture, we don't learn, is that connection can come first. This was something you may remember Paul Marshall Rosenberg talked a lot about, that sort of empathic connection before going to the strategies and the solutions and the trying to solve something. We often just go straight there in our culture, just go right to the fix. But if we can connect first, I think that's the key. Can we connect in a way we hear, we understand, we sort of really acknowledge what's important to both sides, both of us? That then there can be, how can we do this that could really enjoy? This is something else Marshall talked a lot about, enjoy giving and receiving so much. Like, that's a whole different motivation to sort of drop into, instead of who's going to win, who's going to get what they want. How can we enjoy giving to one another? Like that's a whole nother paradigm, the gift economy in an economic kind of paradigm, that we can connect in a way where then we're looking for ways to enjoy making life wonderful for one another. And that's possible. It's not, it goes against a lot of conditioning. And I tried to share that with my kids growing up, but but it's hard too, because there's a lot of momentum going the other way. But it really is possible to learn how to deal with conflict and connect in this totally different way. That's my experience.
With passion. Yeah. And I'm going to put up, just so that we're not quite done yet, but I want to make sure that if people want to know more about John and his work on mindfulness and mediation and just experience any of his work, I highly recommend it. And so as we're coming to an end, it's like, what's made the biggest difference for you in this way of thinking?
Ooh, that's a big question, Paul. Biggest difference. What's coming to me as you asked the question is just what I was saying at the end there. I and my wife likes to point out a lot that I live in a lot of scarcity mentality of not enough, not enough time, won't be able to generate enough money for our family, like all this fear and pressure, and that I believe it's in the sense of not enough. And I know that's not just me. I think almost everybody experiences different variations on that theme of where that we doubt, are we good enough? Are we sufficient? Are we adequate? Are we right? And so this shift into a whole different way of relating, like going to our needs, and needs can open us up into this creativity of like lots of different possibilities for needs to get met. And in terms of, for me, mindfulness in the deepest sense with this work is feeling the kind of life force that animates us, and how that's the kind of that spaciousness inside is the same as the spaciousness out, and that there's a kind of universal awareness that we can tap into that's analogous to the universal needs of language, that if we tap into that sort of formless, infinite spaciousness that's filled with this sort of energy of life, that there's so much possible there for enough and for sufficiency. And we don't have to live in that fear of scarcity. And I still struggle with that. But that's the thing that I really believe, if we as a culture, as human beings, if we can shift into that mindset, which maybe relates to democracy. You brought up democracy before, that like the democracy of wanting to hear from everybody and really work together in a way that there's trusting there's sufficiency for everybody, and we can be democratic. We don't have to be, oppressive with one another. But
well, I'm gonna out myself here. I think the only way that, if you look at humanity, we've said that capitalism was what really made us great. And I don't actually think so. I think it's more socialism. You look at the national parks, you look at a lot of the things that we've created, fire departments, hospitals, a lot of the roads, it's been a social thing. It's we together created something remarkable. And if you leave capitalism to itself, the national parks would be paved right now, or they'd have oil wells in there, or it's like, so there's got to be like this us thing. And socialism isn't a bad thing. Communism, I have whatever mixed feelings about that. I'm not embracing that. Communism, there's no difference between state and business, and the state and the government owns everything. I'm for like intelligent socialism, that we take care of each other.
Yeah,
And if we take care of each other, there is enough.
Yeah, if that's the focus, taking care of each other, caring for each other, compassionately giving, receiving. That was Marshall's phrase. And yeah, I do think that that is the way out of the hell that we have created for ourselves.
Yeah. And for people to think right now, you can't tell me to wear a face mask. And it's like, I'm just worried about my needs right now versus, wow, if we all do this together, we're going to slow this thing down, and we're taking care of each other. And that's when magic happens. And I notice, for me, I feel most alive when I'm contributing and making a difference.
Yeah.
You know, I did the prison project for 8.5 years. I go in once a month. I never got paid. And, you know, somebody at one point said, "You're really generous." I said, no. I liked who I was when I showed up like that. I was taking care of myself, as one of the beautiful needs is the need to contribute.
Yeah.
And understanding that as a parent, you're a parent. Almost every parent on this call knows that feeling of like that they feel alive when they can contribute to their kids, and how painful it feels when you want to contribute and you can't. So thank you, John. If you want to talk more to John, that's his website. You can find out more about him there. I would love it if you would be willing to, people, go and take my relationship quiz at arguelesslovemore.net quiz, and you will find out more about yourself and what are the needs that you have in relationships and what are the skills. There are 7 essential skills, and one of the core ones is what we've talked about tonight, is about noticing, naming, and negotiating needs, and then learning how to communicate that. So hopefully this tonight touched something inside of you, and that you want to bring this out into the world. And if there's people you want to share it with, this recording will be there. You can share it, you can link it, you can do what you want. And please type in what you got from this. If something touched you, moved you, inspired you from something John said or I said, leave that there. And thank you, John. As always, you touch my heart and make me want to be a better person when I hang out with you. So,
well, you touch my heart too, Paul. So thank you for inviting me. I loved the conversation with you, and thanks everyone for listening.